welcome. This is I guess this is the 10th part of our series on Daehaeng Kunsim's translation of the Diamond Sutra. We're working from the Diamond Sutra, The Great Unfolding, based on Daehaeng Kunsim's Korean translation. And today we're looking at chapter 12. We'll see how well this goes, because in a way chapter 12 is pretty short. 저 오늘 119쪽부터 합니다. So, like I said, chapter 12 is pretty short, but there's some really interesting points here. Again, let me start with the title. Correctly teaching these verses is recognized throughout all realms. Right? That's just the title of chapter 12. As I said last week, it's one of these things where just the titles, there's so much going on with the titles. There's layers and layers on layers on the titles. And it's kind of an interesting, recognized. It's not the English sense of the word as just seen, but approved of. Seen and approved of and rewarded, maybe. That's the sense of the word recognized here. And so correctly teaching these verses, what does correctly teaching mean? What's the aspect you're supposed to teach? Well, we see that on page 121. I'll go ahead and read the first paragraph here. Subhuti, teach this sutra to people everywhere, and when you do so, point them towards the underlying meaning, the interconnected flowing whole, which ceaselessly changes and manifests every instant. So, that's kind of the answer right there. This idea of the interconnected flowing whole that ceaselessly changes and manifests every instant, right? So when we say ceaselessly changes and manifests, there's no fixed form, right? There's nothing that stays the same because it's all part of one whole. If there was a fixed form, like this pin, there'd be something that exists over here and something that exists over here, and they'd be separate things, right? But it's all one interpenetrated whole. It's all connected together. It's all flowing together. As I said before, this pin looks like it's a separate pin, but in the course of time, if you look at this in the space of 100 years or 1,000 years or 100,000 years, it's just an eye blink, right? It's less than an eye blink. It's like one of the little dots that floats across your eye for just a second, and then it's something else. So you can't say, this is a pin and it always will be a pin and it always is a pin. It's just for an instant on its way to something else, it takes this shape. And that's the way it is with everything. Our bodies, our lives, everything in here. The funny thing is, every single thing we have here existed in its potential form 2,000 years ago, right? 10,000 years ago. This microphone stand was here on the earth 10,000 years ago, right? It didn't have this form, but the metal, humans are basically the same beings, the same creatures. We have the same capacity that we had back then. All this stuff was here 10,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago. It didn't, I was going to say it didn't come from anywhere else, but setting aside the whole Big Bang and the universe thing, it's all been here. It's just, it changes its shape for a little bit and then it changes into something else. It's because it's one whole. And That's a point that Daehaeng Sunim really tried to get across. That was really important to her. We haven't covered it, or we're not covering it in this discussion, but in her translation of the Heart Sutra, she translated the Heart Sutra quite interestingly, where she, from her perspective, she saw what it was talking about, and she worked from there back through the words, not reading the words, trying to understand what the words were talking about. So it gave her a different perspective. So some of the in the Chinese original, some of the pieces that people read as nouns, or that people read as names, she read as functions or as characteristics. So if you read some of the sutras, they'll give the titles of some of the Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, like bright eyes, seeing everything greatly. The Buddha seeing everything greatly. And if you read it like that, in a way it's kind of, in English, it's kind of funny, because we don't, if I say my name is Bob, or my name is Owen, that's just your name. You don't think of the meanings associated with it. But, the old meaning of, was it Owen or Gordon? The keeper of the eagles, right? My name is keeper of the eagles. Nobody thinks like that. So they don't read names literally. And I think it's the same in Chinese characters, where you get used to the name and you don't think about what underlies the name. And so her translation is quite interesting. And maybe the second or third line of her translation of the Heart Sutra, it goes like this: inherently all beings share the same life, the same mind, the same body, work together as one, freely giving and receiving whatever is needed, while ceaselessly manifesting and changing. But because they don't know this, they walk the path of suffering. So her starting point as somebody who truly awakened and perceived this non-dual reality is that inherently all beings are an interconnected whole. They're sharing the same life, they're sharing the same mind, the same body, working together as one. So even though it looks like you and I are separate, what happens to you affects me. You can't say, what happens to somebody else completely doesn't affect you, because in so many subtle ways it does. It changes the world around you, and if you think on the unseen half of reality, if you think of that as nothing more than quantum reality, it affects you because it's happening there, so it's happening here. And this is, if you want to understand Daehaeng Sunim's perspective and what she wants people to know, that's a big one. That's probably the one of the biggest ones, is inherently all beings are interconnected. So, act like it. And even if you don't see it for yourself, act like it. Make your behavior in tune with that, and gradually your consciousness will start picking up on those trends. Will start picking up on those threads, those relationships. I talked about it last time, but it's the same logic behind the precepts. Right? Don't kill, don't lie, don't steal. Those are, in a way, they're kind of made for people who have a real habit with that. They have a real attachment that they can't get past. They have a deep habit of stealing, or a deep habit of killing, or sexually using other people. And in order to help them get past that, the Buddha gave really specifically said, don't do this. Don't buy your gas at this gas station on the corner. It's always a problem, right? Don't, this kind of very clear, easy to remember thing, which is what you have to do if you have a strong habit. right? That's, in a way, that's kind of the only way to, not the only way, but sometimes you really have to do that when you have a strong habit. Like, I will do this, or I won't do this. Everything this guy says sounds really good, but everybody who follows him gets in trouble. It's like, it sounds like it should be a good thing, but after watching him, every time he says stuff like this and people follow him, somehow their life goes to crap, right? Somehow they get into trouble. So, okay, don't do that. And yeah, I mean, of course, the other big half of Daehaeng Kunsim's teachings is, if this is the reality of things, how do I actually get in touch with that, right? How do I transcend what I am now? Because, Daehaeng Sunim always, well, not always, so often compared it to being inside of a barrel, being trapped inside of a barrel. If you're in a barrel and somebody's put the lid on, you don't actually have any idea what's happening outside, right? If your older brother is rolling the barrel down the hill, you don't know what's going on. You just know it's really bumpy, right? That's where we are right now. We're used to looking at this world at a certain level of habit that we've created. Right now, if you're a human sitting here listening to this or watching this, you've evolved pretty darn high, right? But we don't know the levels we haven't been to before. We don't know the dimensions and the abilities and the capabilities that we haven't experienced yet. If you go back 200 years, 250 years now, and you try to describe a car to somebody, or a train engine, or an airplane, particularly an airplane, so an airplane is like a horse carriage that flaps its wings through the sky. They can't imagine anything more than that because they've never seen it, right? They've never imagined it. If you go out to Incheon Airport and you watch the planes arrive and the planes taxi in, oh wow, okay, I see this thing, I can imagine that. But if you've never imagined truly feeling or experiencing that everybody's life is your life, everybody's happiness is your happiness, everybody's well-being is your well-being, if you've never experienced that, you can't imagine it. It's, you can hear the theory and say, oh, okay, sure. But probably historically, of like the historic sun masters of Korea, China, Japan, at least half of them, when they wrote about if they wrote about their awakening experience, half of them said, my teacher lied to me and told me the truth. It's like, what do you mean they lied to you and told you the truth? They didn't lie to me, but I completely thought they were talking about something different. And when I awakened for myself, I was like, he completely lied. And then I looked at it and he went, no, he didn't. But I just had something else in mind, because I could not imagine what they were talking about. So this idea of how do I, of truly understanding other people's life as my life, that's me perceiving this whole. It's the idea of consciousness perceiving itself. Would start, touch your own tongue with your tongue, kind of a thing. It starts getting kind of complicated, and you start thinking about theories of it more than you're actually able to do it. So Daehaeng Sunim, these previous chapters and the next couple of chapters talk a lot about the theme of the virtue and merit of helping people understand this non-dual truth for themselves. Because it makes, in my opinion, because it makes such a big difference in their life. It's like teaching social skills to a child, right? No, you have to share your toys. If you like the girls, stop hitting them, right? If you like the boys, don't hit them, right? Just stuff that makes your life go a little smoother when you start figuring it out. And that's kind of the same thing here, because if I don't understand, Daehaeng Sunim talked about the visible 50% and the unseen 50%. Well, the visible 50%, that's obvious. Well, what's the unseen 50%? You could say part of that is, like literally unseen microbes, maybe. You could say it's ghosts, but are we also talking about this, what physicists call quantum level entanglement? I think we could be. I would be really surprised. Quantum theory is a theory trying to explain what they're seeing. So I would suspect that the reality is actually even more than that. But if I only act based on what I can see, right off the bat, there's the time issue. What I see is right here, right now. So anybody knows one of the tests of maturity is delayed gratification. How well can I avoid just reacting to my impulses right now? In a way, that kind of defines what an adult is, right? They got older. Sorry, I promised to speak English for this one. All right, delayed gratification, adults. Right, so you have the time problem. What I'm looking at is just a momentary slice of reality. And if I make a judgment or a reaction based just on that slice of reality, it's likely going to be incomplete. If I'm at a perspective where Daehaeng Sunim talks about this a lot, transcending time and place, right? Where the future, the present, and the past are all combined together, then immediately I'm going to have a better sense of where you are and where you're going. So this was many years ago, close to 30 years ago. We had a group meeting of the Sunims and of the monks, actually, and Daehaeng Sunim was there. And one of the monks I was feeling really annoyed by the things he was saying and his attitude. Like, I thought he was being kind of rude to other people, and it was just really getting under my skin. My Korean's not perfect either, so I could have been misunderstanding things. So I try to be a little bit careful in my reactions, because I could well have missed a point. But it was really getting on my nerves. I was just like, yeah. And Daehaeng Sunim stopped what she was saying, and she said, this guy, he's got a really good heart, and he means well, but everything comes out of his mouth sideways. Everything comes out of his mouth wrong. And so, and it kind of, she could tell he didn't mean anything bad, but he wasn't being as careful as he should have been speaking. And so he was coming across as really offensive. And so she was kind of teaching me as well as him. She was telling him, hey buddy, make a little bit of an effort here to be, to work on your social skills here. And just also kind of telling me, it's like, even though he sounds this way, that's not what's really going on. So that's what I mean when I say this is the time problem, right? When I see you, if I don't know any better, I'm just seeing this instantaneous, momentary slice of what's going on with my immediate reactions. And that might be an accurate reflection, if I'm lucky, but that could well be quite off, right? Another person who was, I don't remember why she said this, but I think he got himself in a little bit of trouble. And I think people were annoyed with him. And Daehaeng Sunim said, he looks like he's not behaving very well, but he has improved so much since his last life. And it was like, he's doing a really good job. He was so much better than his last life. And you just kind of have to, you can't really, it's hard to hate somebody when you hear it from that perspective. All right, well, I guess he's improved a lot, even though he's really annoying right now. And that's kind of, we use the word virtue and merit because that's what the Korean and the Chinese characters are. But sometimes I want to say blessing. There's not exactly quite the right word in English, but sometimes I want to say the word blessing because, in English it'd be nice to say that's the blessing of being able to see things from a higher perspective, of being able to, feel your pain is my pain. Your satisfaction, your relief is my relief. So even if I empty out my wallet to give you something, even if I have only my one phone, but you need a phone, and if I'm really at this level, then sometimes I can feel your situation. I can feel, this guy desperately needs a phone. He needs to talk to his mother and father. He needs to have internet access. It's really important for him to have a phone. And I feel that like it's mine, right? And it's just, here, just take this one, right? Because I feel that, I see the background, I see why the need is there. He'll be fine without one. That may be the case too. Sometimes I think Kunsen's perspective was, he needs to suffer a little bit. It'll be good for him. And so, helping is helping, and not helping is helping sometimes. And when you have this wider perspective, you can pick up on what's actually helping. Probably everybody has met somebody who's been very spoiled. Like, when I was growing up, I knew a couple of kids whose parents were quite wealthy. I think at least both parents were lawyers. They made a lot of money, and they were never home. They were never home, and instead they just gave their child lots of money, allowance. And he was a desperately unhappy kid. And another guy got himself into a lot of trouble with drugs and other things because nobody said no to him. There was nobody home to say no to him. So, that was really clear that giving isn't necessarily helping. So from the, I think it's probably chapter 15, where Daehaeng Sunim talks about, she says, even when it felt like my body was being torn apart, I understood that this was all coming from my inherent nature. This was my true self teaching me. And that kind of perspective, I mean, how valuable is that kind of perspective? Because the other way is to start blaming other people, other things. I hate my life. What's wrong with me? You know, why did this person or that person cause me to suffer? If only my husband had ever earned enough money for us to be really happy.
Or there's suddenly my wife's a little bit called sharing.
Or if only my children had been better children or whatever. In the old days, if only my daughter-in-law had given me grandsons, right? All kinds of these ideas that people were really serious about, but they caused a lot of suffering. You know, there's just this, what's the word? Getting caught up in these kinds of things lead so many awkward places. If you think it's somebody else's fault, then you start blaming them. You start abusing them sometimes. You start hurting them, bullying, then resentment comes. And you know that resentment doesn't go away. So you hear my words right now, and when my words finish vibrating in the air, it seems like they're done. Our intentions, this energy doesn't stop just because we don't perceive it. It's like waves or water in the ocean that's rolling along the bottom, and it keeps going and it keeps going and it doesn't stop until we raise the thought, oh, enough. I don't want that to hurt anyone. I don't want that to continue. And so, you know, if I give rise to a thought, oh, I want to be like this, I want to be like that, and I don't make an effort to kind of put a halt to that, that energy keeps going on and on and on underneath. If I have pretty good karma and I have a really hard time in my life, oh, I wish I could be born somewhere like this. I wish I could be, you know, I wish I could be born in a place like that. I wish I could be born, you know, if I was a woman in Korea 100 years ago, I wish I could be born as a man, right? If I was a man in Korea 1,000 years ago, I wish I'd been born as a woman, because all the men got hauled off to war and died, right? On the more smaller level, you know, the fashions change every decade or two. So when I was born, very, 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 very skinny models were considered pretty. You know, just like pencil thin women were considered very attractive. 50 years before then, kind of plump women were considered very attractive. If you think of Kate Winslet in Titanic, right? So 1920, well, that was 1912. She was the ideal beautiful woman for 1912, 1920, around then. You're kind of plump, you know, very, in English, Rubenesque, the painter, very pretty. But if she'd looked like that in 1970, people, oh, how could you be a model? How could you be an actress? You're so fat. Ugh, no. And so, you know, the idea, I want to be like this, I want to be like that. Don't get caught up in that. You know, just, okay, raise the intention. I want to let go of all this stuff. We don't do it so much in Korean Buddhism, but this is where the idea of repentance ceremonies comes from. In the Thousand Hands Sutra, there's a little bit of this. You know, all the suffering, all the pain I've caused through mind, through my body, through my actions, I now repent of. In Korean, 몸으로, 입으로, 뜻으로, 지연제 모든 게 참회합니다. 참회하옵니다. And this idea that's like, okay, I'm sorry for all of that. May everybody I've hurt, may everybody I've hindered, may they all flourish. May they all find their path. Raising thoughts wisely like this is so important because, like I said, that energy just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And if we've hurt somebody or just through our own pain or our own selfishness or our own desperation, if we've hurt other people, that pain and that suffering tends to keep rolling along if we don't make an effort to stop that, if we don't make the mental effort to stop that. I think partly that's why you see the problem of abuse in families continues from generation to generation. You know, you would think if a child has been abused, they would normally be the ones not to abuse other children or other people. But their own pain just bursts out and they become abusive, in part because that's the only thing they've known. Right? That's imprinted in their brain. How do you treat other people? How do you respond to other people? And it tends to be abusive. And they have to make an effort to raise the intention, I'm not going to act like this. But so again, how do we change is kind of where I got distracted onto. And let me just conclude by the main part of how do I change is letting go. You know, raise a positive intention like that, but take what's coming out, good, bad, ugly, bored, in pain, not in pain, in discomfort, whatever it is, and entrust that back to your foundation. Let your foundation dissolve that. This is a bit more complicated than I have time for today, but all of that stuff, to use the translated form, we call it karmic states of consciousness. And sometimes it's feelings, sometimes it's thought, but sometimes these karmic states of consciousness, it's like they leave and come back, bringing stuff into our lives. And if we don't make an effort to change them, they just keep doing that. It's like they're on autopilot. But when we acknowledge what we're feeling, what's happening, what we're doing, and try to return it inwardly and try to entrust it, Daehaeng Sunim compared this to a blast furnace, where if you throw a beer can into a very, very hot furnace, think POSCO, right? POSCO steel, just and it's gone. And what comes back out is completely shiny and new. Sometimes you can say it completely disappears and it's just gone. Other times it comes back out, but because it's met this energy, because it's met this connection with the whole, what comes back out is aligned with the whole, right? What comes back out moves in tune with the whole, much better than what was there before. And so it's really hard to just with one shot completely overturn everything. You don't hear about that very often. That seems to be very rare. What tends to happen more is piece by piece by piece, and then big chunks by big chunks. But when we do that, big chunks of what was hindering us, big chunks of these old, crusted, frozen karmic states get dissolved. And it'd be nice if that was everything. It'd be nice if that was 100% of it. But most of the time it's not. There's still more. Or the habits that created those karmic states of consciousness may be still with us. So if I'm letting go, all of a sudden a massive chunk of resentment and pain just gets dissolved. If I'm paying attention, I may notice what caused that. Right? Oh, I kept blaming other people. Right? I kept comparing other people with my ideal. I kept resenting them for something they were doing. And if I don't stop that, I will grow all those karmic states of consciousness back. Right? If I don't stop that blame, that resentment, all of that hindrance will slowly grow back like a crystal. So I need to be careful. I need to be careful about not falling into those habits. We'll see that later in one of the chapters. Go Sunim says that. She said, from the Buddhist perspective, I can free everybody here. The problem is, they would just jump back in to suffering because the habits that made that suffering for them haven't changed. So if I free you, it's like, yay, you're free. You're free of all these karmic hindrances. Good, yippee. And then you immediately go back and start creating more. I haven't really done anything particularly useful. So the key is teaching people how to overcome this themselves, how to dissolve this for themselves. And again, that's paying attention, entrusting what comes back out, and being aware of the intention. This is where observation, I say paying attention or being aware or observing. I mean these in kind of the same context. If you're aware of what's coming out of you, if you're aware of your thoughts and feelings, then you can respond to them. So many times we're not even aware that we're feeling something. We're not even really aware of why we're doing something. But if I entrust something and I'm paying attention, and I can say, oh, hey, that got better. Then, oh, okay, if that got better, what if I try to entrust this other thing? Oh, that worked. Wait a minute, why didn't that work? How come now it doesn't work? If you're paying attention, you start seeing the things you're doing. Okay, I was blaming somebody, or I got caught up in I'm doing, or I'm trying to recreate a good experience. And okay, that's why I couldn't let go of anything, because I wasn't trying to let go of it, I was trying to get something else. I wasn't trying to entrust it, I was trying to manipulate things into a certain fixed outcome. All right, that's why paying attention is so important. And that's actually why I think we have the 5th precept, don't indulge in intoxicants. Because it's, for most people, a little bit of alcohol or even marijuana or whatever isn't a big deal, right? But if you use it on a regular basis, or you overindulge, then your awareness becomes cloudy, your perception becomes a mess. And if you're using other drugs or you fall into addiction, then it's even worse, where the only thing you really care about is the addiction. So in Korea, at Hanmaum Seon, our precept ceremony says, I vow not to overindulge in alcohol and always respect my limits. Which is kind of funny, because it's like, in Korea, you kind of have to say it that way, because alcohol is such a big part of social functions. In the West, most Buddhist centers are like, no alcohol, which is fine too. But it's the thing in Korean is know your limits. So if you can have 1 or 2 drinks and you're perfectly fine, okay. But if you have 1 or 2 drinks and then you wake up half naked at the subway station at 2 in the morning and don't know how you got there, and that happens every time you drink, then 0 is your is your starting point, is where you need to be, because that's your limitation. That's, if this happens, then I get here. I'm going on and on today, but this is also why Go Sunim called this spiritual practice very scientific, because you're observing and you're paying attention to the results and you're responding based on the results. If I feel like this and I entrust that, things change this way. Okay, and you're learning and you're thinking about, how can I apply this in the future, and next time I should remember to do that. And I think that's one of the reasons why she said this is very scientific, because it's observation, awareness, and response, and then evaluation. All right, I'll go ahead and stop here for today, and we will continue with the small group discussion in a few minutes. Thank you very much.